Hello lovelies and welcome back to my channel. My name is Jay and in today's video I am telling you what books I read in May and I'm telling you my to-be-reads of June. Yes, I have been reading up a storm lately. I was really struggling for a while to find the joy in reading because when I was in high school, the joy of reading really got beat out of me. Just pow, 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 you know? So now I'm really trying to find that love of reading I had back when I was younger because I loved reading when I was a kid. Before I hit high school, I read all the time. I read a lot of bigger books and series, and I had a love of all these different novels I could devour. I devoured as many as I could. And I also liked graphic novels and manga and all kinds of different books really. When I got to high school and had to read books that I did not find enjoyable or that were just downright triggering in a lot of senses. So yeah, that kind of beat the love of reading out of me. It was I don't want to read this right now. You have to. So I just kind of did it, and then I didn't want to read anything else because it was well, I'm already reading this book I hate and it's taking up so much of my time. I don't even have time to read for fun. Anyway, I digress. I have been reading so much this month. I was really excited. I actually started about probably the 10th to the 15th, early to mid-May. I started the reading process again because I was I gotta start reading again. So this is a little skewed. I probably could have read more if I had started at the very beginning like I am with June. I'm still really happy with what I got read. It's really exciting because I really do love reading. It's just that it wasn't fun for a long time because I was forced to read books that weren't fun for me at the time. And now that I have ample time and I'm able to, and it just feels more like a joyous thing, I'm really, really happy that I'm reading again, and it's so fun to just lose yourself in a book. I will say before we start this video that there will be spoilers in certain parts of the video. I try really hard not to spoil anything because I don't like doing that in general, even if the books have been out for forever. But if I do spoil something, there will be a spoiler alert and you'll see it here, and it will be spoiler alert! Without further ado, let's get into the books I've read in May and then we'll do my what I'm reading in June. Let's go. So the first book I read this May was Coraline by Neil Gaiman. I really enjoyed Coraline. It was really fun. For those of you who don't know, which it's kind of hard to believe if anyone doesn't know what Coraline is because there's a really popular movie about it now. Coraline is the story of a little girl who goes to her new home, which is an apartment building that is made out of one big home. She gets to meet all her kooky new neighbors, and then she's intrigued to find a little door that leads to a bricked up other room. However, when she opens it by herself, it opens to a completely different world where she meets her other mother and her other father and the other people that are her neighbors. In this fantastical world, she's given everything she wants, wonderful food, joyous entertainments, all these amazing, amazing things. However, there's something sinister going on underneath it all. Just as Coraline is realizing that there might be something wrong about this world, that's when it starts getting bad. It's a very interesting story. I know a lot of people will be just spoil it, it's already out, it's been out forever. But I want to keep this as spoiler free as possible just because, you never know who's read the books and who hasn't. So I will say Coraline was very different than the movie, which I obviously saw first because I have not read Coraline before. This was my first time reading it. And it was very different from the movie, and I was a little surprised actually. Spoiler alert! If you've seen the movie, there's no YB in the book. There's no there's added scenes that we don't see in the movie, and there's all kinds of different things that just make the book a lot more intense and creepier than the movie in a lot of ways. Because I think it's one of those things where when you have it in a book, you can imagine it so much differently than you can in a movie where you get to see all the visuals. So it was very interesting, as I'm reading through, what I'm picturing is going on in my head, and it's just it's really, really more scary when you see it in your mind, where you can have so many different interpretations of it, versus when you see it in real life and it's just oh, that's what he looks like. I love how Coraline takes a deep dive into childhood fears, as well as shows you the consequences of wanting more than you have and taking for granted what you have already. My rating overall for Coraline will probably be a 4 out of 5. I find it really enjoyable. I did find myself comparing it to the movie in some ways because I have been spoiled on it. in that way, but I just really enjoyed it still. I might even give it a 4.5. I don't know. So I actually did have a couple books that were rereads. Actually, a lot of books that were rereads in this month, because I just wanted to find some fun in reading again, like I talked about earlier in the intro. And so because I wanted to have more fun with reading, I thought I would read some books that I knew for a fact I would like because I've read them before. So the first book that I read that was a reread was Hunger Games, and yes, that means that I am rereading the whole series. I know that so many people have seen Hunger Games, not only the book but the movie, because this is like a really popular book. I read Hunger Games when I was probably like between 12 or 14, I'm not entirely sure, but it was back in like middle school, high school, and I remember ending it, like the whole series, and I literally went in the shower and bawled my eyes out because I was like, this is so traumatic and so devastating of a story. For those of you who don't know what Hunger Games is though, basically it's a story of a world after North America and like the regular world, our world, has collapsed in a future kind of post-apocalyptic yet also highly advanced society at the same time. Basically, it follows the story of Katniss, who lives in District 12, which is a very poor sector of Panem. The country of Panem is ran by the capital, which is the upper crust elite, like the 1%, basically. Whereas the people from 1, 2, 3, all the districts up to 12, especially as they go down lower, are the more lower class citizens treated worse under the rule of the capital. Each district is specifically a source of, say, agriculture, farming, mining, these basic but also really important resources that they need in the capital, but also the people that are getting them these resources are living under the harsh, awful, dangerous circumstances while the capital people get whatever they want. And the main part of this story is the fact that the capital holds a game, the Hunger Games, in which they volunteer 2 tributes, male and female, to go and fight to the death. Spoiler alert! In the first book of the series, this is where we get our setup, where we meet Katniss, we meet Peeta, the second tribute, the male tribute. We follow them along as they are introduced, prepped, and then sent into the games, and we see a relationship develop between them, but at the same time, it's very muddled by the fact that they have to fight to the death, and that there's all these mind games at play, and then there's all these unresolved feelings from their past as well that we learn about. So it's a very, very dynamic book and very interesting and very fast-paced and action-packed, which is really, really enjoyable for someone like me who likes that high-paced, high-intensity situation books. I really like when there's not a lot of slow pacing because, as you'll come to find out, that is like my death sentence for a book. I would rate Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins probably a 5 out of 5 just because I really do genuinely love it. It's like also very nostalgic for me because obviously I read it before and I read it when I was a lot younger, and now reading it again, it just really, really holds up with how good it is. Another book series like that is Percy Jackson, which I will be trying to read very, very soon. Again, reread. But yeah, I love it. And then of course the next book that I read this month was Catching Fire. Actually, I forgot to mention this, but me and Lycan read these 2 books together and we spent a lot of time just reading them aloud to each other, which was really, really nice. Unfortunately, by the end of this one, we were getting close to the end of the month, and I was like, I have to get it done before the end of the month or else it's cheating. So I ended up finishing the last 7 chapters on May 31st, and yeah, it was fine. It was dandy. But we are definitely going to be reading Mockingjay together and reading it out loud together. And if you want to see like a reading vlog or reading vlogs throughout the month where like we can show you how we read aloud to each other, or like just reading vlogs in general, please let me know, because I'm doing a ton of reading this month, so might be perfect time for something like that. Spoiler alert! The basic synopsis of Hunger Games is that after Peeta and Katniss return from the Hunger Games, they live out their lives. Katniss basically really hates living. She's very depressed throughout this entire book. It's very clear that she understands that she is going to have to do and be a part of these games, not just the Hunger Games, but the game of that the Capitol has in play her entire life now. She's basically going to have to marry Peeta, have children with Peeta, watch them grow up under the Capitol rule, unless she does something differently. Catching Fire is the kind of like climax point, in my opinion, of the series. Each book obviously has their climax point, but for the series itself, this is where things really start taking off. This is where we find out just how bad the Capitol really is, outside of not only the games, but also other things as well. We learn more about how Katniss's and Peeta's endeavors in the games have really shifted public and like society as a whole. How like there's uprisings and basically a revolution happening, and many parts of Panem, like the districts, are fighting back against the Capitol's tyranny, and all because Katniss showed that it was possible through beating the games basically and allowing herself and Peeta to live at the end of Hunger Games Book 1. I really love stories like this. I really love stories about revolution and just about overcoming tyranny and about rebellion and about people coming together to fight against a common enemy. I wonder why it is that I like that stuff so much. I wonder if there's any real world reason I would like stuff like that. We need a revolution. We need a revolution. The reason I really enjoy Catching Fire though is because I think, one, it develops a lot more of the relationships that are already in play when we start the series. It develops them not only in a romantic sense, but also in like familial, platonic, enemies even. There's just so many characters that come in now that will be long-term characters, whereas before it felt they were more like temporary because so many of them got killed off in the first book. So I really like this particular book in the series. We're amping up to the end where we know there will be like drastic and devastating results, and it's kind of like that build up, that intensity, that the drum roll of it all. It's very interesting to me. And then by the end of the book we get that bomb, and then we kind of see the aftermath in The Mockingjay, which I will be reading, but we'll get to that later. The fourth book that I read this month was Cemetery Boys. I enjoy this book. I really do. I like it a lot. However, I did have some issues with it that I will get into after I give you my little synopsis. The story of Cemetery Boys basically follows Yadriel, a young trans man who is also a Bruhux. I hope I'm saying that right. A brujo or a bruja who is basically able to commune with the dead and use healing abilities if you're a bruja, and like you can send spirits to the spirit world if you are a brujo. I really found Cemetery Boys to be very interesting in the sense it showed Latinx culture through a trans man's perspective, and like obviously that's a very new narrative that I don't think is often explored in a lot of ways. And obviously from a cultural standpoint where the language itself is very gendered, it's very, very difficult for Yadriel to find himself being seen for his birth gender versus who he actually is by not only his family but his community around him as well, because the Bruhux are a very, very large community. Spoiler alert! The story is basically Yadriel is trying to prove himself not only as a young man amongst his community, but also as a brujo amongst his community, to show that he has the powers that Lady Death bestowed upon them years and years and centuries ago. And basically he wants to prove to his community that he is a brujo. Amongst all this, there's also the fact that Miguel, Yadriel's cousin, has been murdered, and they cannot find his body. As Yadriel is trying to solve the mystery surrounding his cousin's death, he also happens upon a new spirit, Julian, who he knows from school somewhat. Julian is the misunderstood, edgy guy of the school who is known for like being a bad boy, like that trope. And I really enjoy his character. He's a very fun-loving, energetic, ADHD-coded character, and I really enjoyed that about him. The book describes him as very electric, intense, alive with energy, And it's very funny because throughout almost the entirety of the book, he is a spirit. I will say, there were parts of this book that were very disappointing for me because it just, by the end of it, I was left wanting so much more than I was given in this book. I love the trans representation. I love the story. I love the characters. The characters are very well described, very, very realistic, very true to who they are. Except for one particular character, which was very upsetting at the end. I'm just gonna say it, the end of this book really, really upset me because we find out at the end, Yadriel's Tio, his uncle, who has supported him wholeheartedly, who has loved him, who has been there for him, who has encouraged him, told him he had these abilities even when his own family and community refused to acknowledge that he would or even could, turns out to be the villain. He turns out to be the villain, and it really just, I knew it was gonna happen exactly how it happened very, very early on, about probably midway through the book. When you learn about the sacrificial swords, immediately after they mentioned it the second time, I was like, the uncle is gonna be the one who killed the people in his, yeah, it's gonna be that way, isn't it? And it was, and I was so disappointed. I was like, I hope that's not how it happens, but then it happened like that. And it was just really, really disappointing. Because I was so disappointed with the ending of the book, and because this does have some pacing issues in it, like some very serious pacing issues, I have to give Cemetery Boys only a 2.5 to 3 out of 5 stars. And I feel bad about it. I really do. I want to like this book more than I do. But honestly, it just left me really hungry for more storyline. I do love the trans representation in this book. I do love the character development, but the pacing and the ending were just not my jam. So 2.5, maybe a 3 out of 5 stars. This might be your jam, but for me it was more like a 2.5. That being said, the author Aiden Thomas has said that they want to bring a sequel to this series, like when they go to college, so I am very interested in that. I do want to see what their story and other stories look like as well, because I know they have other books as well. This one was just a little bit of a letdown at the end for me personally. And then the last few books that I read were actually from the graphic novel series Bone. So I read all the first 4 editions of the Bone series. I read Out from Boneville, The Great Cow Race, Eye of the Storm, and The Dragon Slayer. And this is another reread for me. I really enjoy the Bone books. I think they're so fun. I think the art style, especially as it progresses throughout the series, is absolutely lovely. I remember when I was reading this when I was little, in my notebook, I would redraw the drawings of food in my notebook. And I would just try to get them as close to the drawings in the book as I could, and it was just such a fun exercise. The basic story of Bone is that Foam Bone, after being run out of town with his 2 cousins, Smiley Bone and Phony Bone, very different distinction. I wish they did not have such similar names, but after they get run out of town because Phony Bone is a swindler and a con man, they find themselves in a mountain area, and after they get separated, Foam Bone finds himself in a small valley. Foam Bone finds himself with Thorn and Grandma Ben. And these 2 characters are very, very important characters, as we will learn later on. Essentially, he lives with them, works with them in the farm, and as we go throughout the story, more and more secrets and hidden things are unveiled, and we learn so much more about this world in general, but it's a very, very slow burn, if that makes sense. In the first book, Boneville, we basically get an introduction into the story where we meet all of our characters and we learn about what the basic premise of this world is like. I really enjoy the art style. I find it so interesting and lovely. I really like to watch it progress as well, because it seems to only get better as it goes on further and further. Bone by Jeff Smith is a really fun, really quick read, honestly. Like, if you wanted to, I bet you could read the whole series within a day or 2 if you really wanted to. It's a really fun read. It's really interesting to see just the way that the characters develop over time and how the effects of what's going on in their life really do change and shape them. I think it's definitely a story about what we become when we know more about ourselves. And with that, that is all the books that I have read in the month of May. Okay, so I'm gonna make this part really, really quick because my camera is dying. And also, I've been recording for like over an hour now, but I'm going to get into my to-be-reads for June this month, so let's get into that. Also, this is going to be in no particular order, even if I say like the first book or, you know, the second book, whatever. This is in no particular order at all. The first book on my list of to be reads for June is The Body Is Not an Apology by Sonia Renee Taylor. I'm really excited to read this one. I've read bits and pieces of it before, but never in its entirety. So I really want to read this in full and really do the introspection for it and like all the little bits of it. I've already started the first chapter and I'm really excited. I am on the first unapologetic inquiry, and let me just read it to you. Unapologetic inquiry number 1. We all live at multiple intersections of identity. What are your intersections? How do your multiple identities affect each other? I find this very interesting. I find the whole book to be really amazing just from what I have read of it, and I'm really excited to read it in its entirety, do the self-reflection, do the like inquisitive thinking that comes with a book like this about radical self-love and radical self-acceptance. So definitely a book that I recommend, and I'm excited to read in full. The next book on my list is The Shadow of Perseus by Claire Haywood. From my understanding, it's a story told from the perspectives of Danae, Medusa, and Andromeda, 3 women who were very specifically influenced or affected by Perseus, and I'm really interested. This is supposed to be like kind of a feminist retelling, and I'm really interested in seeing how it goes. I'm really excited for Medusa's chapter or story, especially because I am a Medusa apologist 110%. I fucking love Medusa! The next book on my list is Dracula by Bram Stoker. You can't even tell that it's Dracula because of the book, but yeah, it is. Basically, I've been wanting to read Dracula for a long time. I've been wanting to read a lot of more like classic literature, if this is even counted as that. I don't even know. But you know, like more classic horror literature, I guess. It's a very hefty book at over 400 pages, with the text being quite small. I'm really excited for the horror of it because I know that this is supposed to be like really deep dark apparently. And that's something I really enjoy, is like stories that are actually very scary. So yeah, I'm excited for this one. I'm really excited. I hope I can get through it all in the month. I don't know, but I have a very ambitious to be read this month because I got so much done last month. So yeah. And then to follow up on Dracula, the next book on my list, Frankenstein. I'm really excited. I love Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. I've read bits and pieces of it before, but never the full entirety of it because it was just like kind of intimidating for me. But I'm really excited to finally read it in full because I think it's just like such an iconic story. It's so, isn't it heralded as one of the first science fiction like novels of all time? Really excited to read Frankenstein. If you don't know what Frankenstein is, where have you been? Are you not into horror at all? Come on. If you don't know what Frankenstein is, the basic story is a mad scientist brings to life a monster from bits and pieces of dead humans, and it runs amok. That's about it. It does not go how we intended it to go. Who would have thunk it? The next book on my to-read list is The False Prince by Jennifer A. Nielsen. I'm a little nervous for this one. I haven't really read a lot about it or, you know, anything really. I'm really interested to read this. I've heard a lot of really good things about it. I've heard a lot of really good things about it. And so I'm just interested to really get into it. I don't know a lot about the actual story. I need to like start reading more about the authors and the books themselves before I start reading them, but it's fine. Sometimes I just pick up a book and I'm like, this looks cool, I'll read it. Of course I'm reading The Mockingjay because I've read the other 2 books. Really excited to read the last book again, reread it I guess, since childhood, but I'm really excited to reread this one. The premise is basically, it follows the Hunger Games series. It's the very last book. This is where a lot of stuff goes down. A lot of stuff gets real traumatic, if they can get more traumatic than the Hunger Games already are, which it does. I just love Hunger Games series. Absolutely adore it. And the last thing to be read for the month of June is the Rest of the Bone series 5 through 9. And I might read some of the spin-offs too if I can, if I have time this month, but I will be reading the rest of these. I'm really excited to finish off this series as well as Hunger Games. As you can tell, I kind of have an ambitious amount of books I want to read this month. I am really excited though for all the books I'm going to read this June, and if you like this kind of video, please let me know and I can do them every month for all the books that I've read for every month. Also, please leave me your book suggestions in the comment section. That would be so fucking cool. I'm just really excited to get to read more this month, and that I've been reading more for the past couple months now. So I'm really happy, and I'm really happy about reading, and I'm really excited to just get back into it and find that joy and that love of reading again. So yeah. Thank you so much for watching today's video. If you enjoyed, please like, comment, share, and subscribe, babe. And I will see you in the next